Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another Relationship Ministry seminar. Listen, we're going to get right into it because the time is going to go by really fast. And today I am so excited to have a new host. We're going to turn this streaming over to Pastor Corey Johnson. He's going to host us today. But before he does host us, what we're going to do is we are going to bring in, or I'm going to announce our new special guest that we're going to add to this panel. Dr. Sidney Freeman Jr. is a tenured associate professor of adult organizational learning and leadership at the University of Idaho and has published over 80 publications. Mercy. He completed his academic pursuits at Adventist educational institutions from pre-kindergarten through undergraduate studies, including Pine Forge Academy, which is one of 4 historically Black boarding academies in the United States. In 2018, he was honored by the National Pine Forge Academy Alumni Association, with its meritorious award. Dr. Freeman also attended and completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Disciplinary Studies at Oakwood University, where in 2017, he was recognized as one of the alumni faces of Oakwood University, and he earned a Master's and Ph.D. in Higher Education Administration at Auburn University in Alabama, where he was recently named the 2020 recipient of the College of Education Outstanding Young Alumni Award. Listen, I'm so excited to have Dr. Freeman on the broadcast. Of course, Corey, we're not going to introduce you. We're not going to introduce you. We're not going to introduce Uncle Ronnie. We're not going to introduce Jaymie. Listen, just go to our website, go to our YouTube page, and by all means, pull some of the previous broadcasts, and you will be able to get some information on these brothers. Corey, just welcome the folk, and then we'll break for this intro video, and then we'll get you all right on into the broadcast.
Good afternoon, everybody. We are so excited. I want to thank Dr. Defoe for allowing, for inviting us all for this very important discussion. Listen, I'm excited. Why don't you all, everybody who's watching, hit the share button, post this on your page. Let's spread this. There's going to be a powerful, important conversation among brothers, with brothers, before everybody. So I'm excited to get started. I'm ready. Let's get this thing rolling, man.
All right, let's go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. We are here, with the Allegheny Conference Relationship Ministries. I am so excited to begin this conversation. Today, we have a powerful topic, which is going to bring forth some intersectionality, if you please. We get to talk about 3 different things. We're going to talk about Black men, so that's race. We're going to talk about gender, maleness, and we're going to talk about religion. And so we are going to mesh these things together in a conversation, in a conversation on Black men and the Black church. I am so excited to get this going. I'm Pastor Corey Johnson. I pastor the Mount Sinai Church. I'm going to ask if our guests can just say something really quick to the audience. We're going to start with you, Uncle Ronnie, and then we'll end with our newest guest.
I'm thankful for this opportunity again to be with you, brothers, to just try to lend a little bit more to this conversation. And I'm thankful for all the people who are viewing this, who have been supporting Dr. Defoe and Relationship Ministries at Allegheny East Conference.
Hey, my name is Jaymie Pottinger, and I'm always excited to be a part of this platform, having great conversation. Thank Dr. Defoe again for having us and for the team, and we're looking forward to talking about things that are very sensitive topics that immediately and directly impact our communities, and so that we could bring some awareness and also hopefully provide some channels and opportunities for growth and for transformation as we seek to delve into this kind of topic.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I'm a son of Allegheny East Conference. I'm from Camden, New Jersey, my Olivet Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so it's exciting to be amongst colleagues, and I look forward to engaging in some rigorous conversations about ways in which we can support each other as Black men.
Amen. So we are excited. We are so excited for our panel discussion this afternoon. We're talking about Black men and the Black church. I'll get it started with this just to kind of get the ball rolling. I am a pastor. I've grown up in the church, raised in African-American congregations. And one phenomenon that I have discovered is the impact of the church on Black men and the necessity of faith on Black men. I was reading an article in the Atlantic, and I was reading an article in the Atlantic on the importance of faith when it relates to the quality of life of Black men in America. I want to share some statistics with you. It says that in the Atlantic.com, it says, why do some Black men flourish while others struggle? One answer is faith. African-American men attend church at rates notably above the national average. 37% of those aged 18 to 60 attend several times a month or more, compared to 30% of non-Black men, according to the 2008 to 2014 General Social Survey. And compared to their less religious peers, these 6 million or so Black men are significantly more likely to thrive. Take, for example, criminal activity. 20% of young church-going Black men report having committed a crime, compared to 24% of their peers who were not regular attendees. Even after controlling the demographic factors like education and family background, likewise, only 4% of young Black men aged 22 to 26 who attended church earlier in their 20s ended up in prison, compared to 6% who did not regularly attend church. So what I was reading was about how what faith and specifically church life does for Black men. I want to start in a bit of a different way and ask you all, we'll start with you, Uncle Ronnie. Tell us about your experience with church growing up as a Black man, and kind of start off with what it has been for you specifically, and what you have noticed with friends and other people you've socialized with who have grown up within the context of the Black church.
Well, it was my privilege to be born on the seventh day, on the Sabbath. In West Africa, the Akan people, male children who are born on the seventh day is named Kwame. The creator is called Anyame Kwame. In fact, I was born on the day my mother was to get baptized.
Wow.
And after my family, which was one of, if not the most balanced, spiritual, sense of humor, encouraging places to grow up, my extended village was the Black church, was our church. And it provided fellowship, friendship, and fun as we grew up. The word was put into us. For those who are watching who understand what I'm about to say, every 13th Sabbath we had to say our memory verses by heart. You see, if you only knew 12, you couldn't get up. And our leader, Brother Evans, used to lead us like a choir. He'd start and he'd say, "Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly." And we quote, by the age of 14, I had memorized over 652 scriptures.
Wow.
In my mind. The foundation that I received in that village, which we didn't have much, but we had each other, was very significant and beneficial to my upbringing and even to this very day.
I'm going to ask for Dr. Freeman to hop in here and give us your perspective.
Yeah, so I believe the church was really important and formative to my development. I call myself a church boy, and so one of the things that was really nice, it was that although I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church and I went to Seventh-day Adventist educational institutions, I also had opportunities outside of the church. So being from Camden, New Jersey, one of the most formative experiences I had was I knew Ty Tribbett before Ty Tribbett became a famous person, right? So my family would go around and we would sing in different places around Allegheny East Conference, but we also would do ministry within the Camden environment. And so I met Ty Tribbett there, and I saw kind of excellence as a Black male being unapologetic about Christ publicly. And so those types of opportunities, also going over to Philadelphia and seeing young people a lot of times, whether it was Ebenezer or North Philly Church and others, seeing Black men serving in different roles, even young men serving as youth elders, preaching at an early age. Those things were inspiring. I was able to sing. My thing wasn't preaching, but it was singing. But it was nice to see those things. So it was not foreign from me to see Black men in leadership roles in the church. And so that was almost kind of expected for me to do the same as I got older.
Good. And Jaymie, why don't you hop in here?
I think when I think about church, I think that's where I got my start in just about everything, in terms of conversation, in terms of structure, feedback, security, value added, a safe place to make mistake, and understanding that I'm more than what outside folks may think that I am. So that's where that gave me the latitude to explore. It gave me the latitude and the boundaries to make mistakes and still being accepted. It gave me the enforced culture that was taught in my home, so that when I walk among my other Black brothers, they'll always ask me the question, what on earth is so different about you? And you're not even 5'5" tall. But what happened is that confidence was poured into me so much that no matter where I was, I considered myself to be a prince, a king, and somebody who was one of the greatest persons in whatever room I found myself in. So that sense of safety. And as you talk about the facts there's another article that talked about that over an 8% points difference in terms of Black males end up getting married and staying out of prison when they find themselves in the church, regardless of the structuring and the culturing of the church. So when I think about those things, and when I compare myself with my peers, and I think about it in my family growing up, my mother was the only child of 8 kids who were Seventh-day Adventists. My father, who had over 7 siblings, had nobody in his family who was a Seventh-day Adventist. My father only became a Seventh-day Adventist in 1999 when I was leaving high school. Think about it. So the Adventist structure and culture set the shape not just for my immediate family, but for all my parents' siblings who were watching the impact that Christian culturing, Seventh-day Adventist culturing had on this impoverished family, and how much it catapulted us directly from that lower bar of income, poverty, you name the different things, to a place whereby we could set the trend. So when I talk about Christian household and church and stuff like that, even though we have our flaws, I'm one who walks around with pride about the impact and the influence that it have when you are in the right setting, because you're getting honest feedback that serves to give you the platform to expand beyond your comfort zone and to take hold of who you are.
That is a great point. And what I would say is, what I'm noticing in this conversation is that there are sociological, and to some degree, sociological and economic, and there are benefits for Black men, it seems, for being a part of the Black church and that cult and that space that goes beyond just spiritual growth. We're talking about prison rate. We're talking about likelihood for marriage. We're talking about elevation for some into the middle class and beyond. And so I'm going to just throw this out there. Whoever jumps in, you can kind of just jump in. And can you speak to the importance of the Black church for Black men in particular when it comes to sociological, when it comes to sociological development, upward mobility, and things of that nature?
My mother said that more things are caught than taught. We can say all we want to say, but people usually, or children usually, go by what they see.
That's good.
Because there is a level of expectation in the Black church. It was not simply said, it was also modeled in various Black men there, whether they were carpenters or whether they were college professors. We were able to see, to have visualization. The optics was something, and we all understand that 80% of what we really learn comes through images.
Yeah, that's good.
It comes through sight, you see. And so, you know, and being younger, we had the privilege of not knowing all of the other issues that was basically going on. So, you know, it was blinders on many of our eyes, maybe till a certain age and so forth. But so be it. That was fine to be able to see, to interact. Very quickly, we had one brother in our church, his name was Philip Dennis. Philip Dennis went to school with George Washington Carver. Wow. And on Sabbath afternoons in the summer, we would go on nature walks. And I mean, he would just show us leaves and berries and so forth. He just poured into us the benefits and the understanding of nature. These are the type of persons that I had in that particular space and environment growing up. And it was very beneficial to my psychology, to my psyche, as well as my character.
That's good. That's good. Anyone else?
Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, I can think about it not just as in the church, but I had the privilege. I keep on going back to church school, but it was amazing that, for instance, going to Pine Forge, I had probably about 7 or 8 Black male teachers during my high school experience, whereas I find a lot of people, they may not have had any. And so I saw Black male excellence from the standpoint of being educators. I was what we called a shipment worker, which was a person that would help clean the grounds. And a black man by the name of Rouse Shipman was the person who taught me how to keep up things and all of that. I had great male deans, and so not only did we go to worship together because we were on campus, but I got to see them interact with their family. So it reinforced what I learned in church. So I saw them in church, I saw them in school, and I saw them in play, as you would say, in other spaces. So I think having that holistic experience, both with school and in church, were multiple. It was reinforcing.
Good.
I want to jump in by saying that the structural disadvantages that Pastor Johnson spoke of earlier, it automatically gives us a mind frame as Black males that we have lids, as Dr. John Maxwell speak about, and limits. And the question is, when you grow up exposed to lids and limits, it puts you in a position of insecurity. And that insecurity allows you to revert or reverse to that which you have inherited, which is either impoverished, either poor, or something that offers no latitude for expansion or growth exponentially. So it's almost as if it's unfair for you to think in the realm of becoming more than what you have seen in your outside community. Good. I call it the stained glass. You know, the stained glass allows you not to see the fact that the seeds could grow, the trees could grow. You could bear fruits beyond your immediate surrounding. What church does, or what church did for me and for my family and for many other friends that I have in the Afrocentric community, is that it gave us something that allowed us to dream beyond what the popular culture was telling us. It gave us the confidence that even allowed us to stood up confidently when everybody else was saying that we're stupid, arrogant, forthright, and too much of a big dreamer in where we're heading for. Mm-hmm. So when I think about those areas, I understand and I reinforce this whenever I speak to my Black brothers, that you have to think beyond the structural enslavement that we automatically inherit and use, as Pastor Ronnie said, you have to use the thing that you see in your experience and your exposure in the church setting to understand that you could do it too. But I think the onus is also on the Black church to ensure that that authentic side of the exposure in the church remains relevant, so that our impoverished Black boys don't feel as if there's no space for them to grow from their impoverished position to the place of what they're experiencing or what they're being exposed to within the church setting. So the bridge must be laid, the platform must be laid so that they could feel safe to grow in that setting. And for me, I was privileged to have that kind of setting going through, and I account that for my growth and my success.
I want to kind of push the conversation forward a little bit. I want to push the conversation forward a little bit, and I want to kind of focus in on two words that we've seen used so far in this conversation: safe and authentic. I think those are important words when it comes to Black male experience and Black male in religious life experiences. I'll say for me, one thing I noticed growing up in Black churches, and as I've grown, I've noticed more and more that it seems as though a lot of brothers who were involved in church, and I'm talking about not pastors, but lay people who were involved in church, it seemed as if they were brothers who enjoyed being active in church. They enjoyed leading in church and in holding positions in church. But over time, and in conversation, as I've been able to kind of understand some of the men that I've grown up seeing and how they've lived, many of us can testify, and Uncle Ronnie, you kind of hinted at this, that there was this dichotomous experience between church life and home life, and my religious faith and my actual and who I am in my personal struggles. There was this dichotomy that existed for a lot of Black men. And I want to kind of deal with how can we, as Black men in a religious setting as Black men, how can we create authentic relationships within the church and and foster a culture of vulnerability within the church where men feel comfortable to say, this is my struggle, this is what I'm dealing with, and this is what I need. I'm going to ask if Dr. Freeman, if you can start off with that, and I'm going to ask Uncle Ronnie if you could follow up.
Yeah, I think it's so important for us to have strong programming. I'm thinking about it in the context of this COVID season, where we're not able to be in the same space at the same time. And one of the things I'm often seeing is that in the church, women's ministries, there's a robust emphasis on women's ministries and not necessarily men's ministries. And so looking at kind of the resources that are put into those ministries are important. And a lot of this has to do with building authentic relationships. And people are not going to want to be vulnerable unless they feel that it's going to be safe. So it's important to create safe spaces, the church creating opportunities such as social opportunities where people can learn about each other in a light way and then build up to ways in which we can engage each other in more deep ways.
In addition to what Dr. Freeman said as it pertains to these type of support systems there, I want to just spin it just a little bit this way. And Jaymie has said this basically in our last two men's sessions or previous men's sessions. He spoke about the word awareness. And I think that that's quintessential because of this. I didn't know until 1995 that my father drank alcohol. When I was born, he was in the church and first elder. So nobody told me I had a predisposition. So when I got older and I started dibbling and dabbling and rolling up and so forth, I struggled. And the Spirit gave me a serious revelation, and it is this: predisposition can undermine character development. And so, Corey, as you mentioned about brothers who were involved leading out and so forth, if we are not careful, if we are not self-aware, if we don't have the support systems, as Dr. Freeman says, and the support in men's ministry and to deal with these specific issues, predisposition is going to kick in at some time or another. We handle it in different ways, but in some type of way, brothers usually end up self-medicating some type of way, dealing with predispositions. As the scripture says, the prophet said, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And so an awareness of ourselves has to be an important component in our growth and development within the Black church also, so that there are things that can assist to counter the predispositions that will take us out and move us out and move us into lives and areas of regret.
Jaymie, you want to hop in here?
I'll hop in real quickly. And what I'll say, real sweet that you just said that, Pastor Ronnie, is that predisposition is really our go-to phase, or it's really our comfort zone. And we know that when we're in our comfort zone, we do what is comfortable. We rock ourselves to sleep, or we rock ourselves to destruction. So that's a bad thing. I think the next thing that we have to also think about is that there are deficient families, and there are fathers who are acting as fathers who are still lacking certain skill set that is needed. So as a Black church, we have to seek to provide our mothers who are single mothers, and also provide our fathers who are playing the role, but they are lacking in the skill set that is necessary in order for them to lead their families beyond that comfort zone, lead their sons beyond that place of going back in time and going to the things that were not so good in their fathers or their forefathers' past, so that they could make a difference as they move forward in their growth process.
Pew Research did a study, and what they found was, and something that they studied, we didn't need the research of it. We know it, we see it, I see it every week, that Black women are much more likely to consider themselves religious and to consider themselves members of churches than men. And we are seeing this phenomenon where Black men are not the majority of the demographic in the church, although most people who lead churches as pastors are men. Pastors, even elders, are men. And so why is it, and I'm going to throw this out there, whoever wants to just catch it and begin our dialogue on this, why is it that Black men are outnumbered in the church, even though Black men are overwhelmingly pastors and leaders in Black churches? Where are the brothers? Why are we not around?
I'll jump in. One of the things I've been thinking about in relationship to this question is authenticity. When I think about pastoral leadership and it being male, I would say it's almost like game knows game. And so if the pastor, for instance, comes off as someone that is not being authentic, it can possibly rub men the wrong way. Also, what is the concentration of their ministry? So is their ministry actually relevant to the issues impacting men, Black men? And so one of the things I posted in Facebook, maybe like sometime last year, was that I no longer will sit under pastoral leadership that does not address equity, justice, and liberation. And so those are the types of things that are really important for ministries to kind of connect with men.
Yeah, that's good.
Go ahead, Jaymie.
One of the things that I'll say here is, and this is one of the bite back that I've gotten, having worked in one of the greatest institutions on earth, that is associated with good doctor who just spoke, Pine Forge Academy. One of the greatest pushback that I've heard and I've seen in the Afrocentric community in terms of Black males, in terms of them participating and engaging in church, because we know that engagement reinforces whatever you could receive from that given group, is that the culture sometimes in the church exceeds the socioeconomic standpoint of the person who is seeking to benefit from the church setting. So I think there are times when if a black male may find that whatever the church is offering, or the standards or the expectation for their membership, is hinged on certain things that exceeds who they are, or that exceeds what they can afford, or exceeds what they can wear, or exceeds what they should be, or where they should be coming from, then that poses itself as a hurdle or a deterrent for them engaging and being a consistent part of it. The next thing is the subcultures. There's some subcultures within our Afrocentric community that paints a picture of the church as if you're weak, or you're not that cool of a person because you are watered down to be a part of any group that submits to a power that is greater than yourself as a black person. And I don't know how we want to dig in that area.
We're going there. Always going there.
I know that I touched that because I really want to pull Uncle Ronnie out of this one. I'm being honest, because I've sat at his feet before when I was in Pennsylvania, and he sparked my interest in terms of studying deeper where that is concerned. And it's after my exposure in that regard, I felt a greater calling to paint a better picture, a more appealing picture, a more realistic picture, a more life-changing picture, a picture that gives hope for our black brothers in terms of being a part of the church process, or the church group, or the family of God, as opposed to them having to change themselves, and themselves not meaning their weak traits, but themselves meaning their blackness, themselves meaning exactly what they were created to do. So I think because of the Anglo-Saxon impact on our church, as our black males become more, and Dr. Elder Ronnie just said it earlier, become more aware of themselves, they may serve sometimes to disassociate themselves from the church. And the long run is that, as you said, they lose the benefit. They become members of that 92% or that next 2%, as opposed to being a part of that 8% that end up living successful lives.
And I'm so glad that Jaymie, you brought this up. I'm so glad you brought this up. When you look at church history, you look at Black church history, there seemed to have been a great exodus in the post-King era. I would say after 1968 through the 70s, there seemed to be a great exodus of Black men in the church as Pan-Africanism, as Black awareness, as the Black Power movement began to take shape. There began to be an exodus from the Black church after the assassination of Dr. King. And it seems as if this exodus was not based upon theology, but was based upon sociology. And I'm so glad Jaymie brought that up. I'm going to ask, Ronnie, you can speak to that, and just where the sociology, how the sociology of the church has kind of left a lot of brothers to feel like, listen, I can get with God, but I can't get with that. I can't get with that institution. Can you speak to that a little bit, and what we can do, understanding that motif that we're facing?
There's always been a dichotomy between the King Malcolm mindset. Let me just put it basically that way, where one spoke more to passivity as the other spoke to liberation. That tension has always gone on. So in the minds of Black men, they had to make a decision, basically. But in 1955, someone asked James Baldwin a question. They asked him, "Is the Black church dead?" James Baldwin said, and I'm quoting, "Let me rephrase this. Any organization that has problems attracting its youth, its existence is at least debatable." So basically, the Black church, in a collective way, moved from a leader of liberation to a symbol. And many brothers was not moving with symbols. They were staying with liberation. Also, when they looked at the leadership style, Eurocentric leadership style, even among Black churches. Let me get this quick history. By 1919, 90% of Africans in America were in the 7 largest Black denominations, Pentecostal, AME, Kojic, and so forth. Only 10% of Blacks in America joined white-run denominations. Therefore, Seventh-day Adventists, even blacks, are in the 10 percentile, which means that we are not even a black church, even with 9 regional conferences. So we're really not on the Richter scale, basically, as it pertains to the black community. So therefore, you won't find many brothers who are going to find a Eurocentric construct that has nothing to do with liberation, but more for indoctrinization, which then turns to internalization, which then ends up institutionalization. And when a person is institutionalized, they ain't going nowhere. They ain't going to do nothing. They're just stuck. Or brothers have to choose, and many of them have chosen liberation.
So we take about 2 seconds to cool off, let the atmosphere just cool off. I'm gonna ask Dr. Freeman. You have anything you want to add to that?
I'm just thinking about the conversations I've been having recently about the need for a Black Adventist theology, right? That given where we are with the church right now, we need more trained Black theologians that are trained in the Greek and the Hebrew to look at it from a lens that understands our background. And so that's something that I'm really thinking is important. I think there's a bigger discussion even about us as a denomination staying with the denominational structure as it currently stands. We see that. So, for instance, all my life I was generally within regional conferences, and so I didn't see some of the racist things that would happen that happen. And so what happens when you come out of that bubble and you kind of interact with those from our white brothers and sisters, and you're saying, okay, well, I see that they don't care about me and the struggle of Black people at large. What would it look like to imagine a structure that would support our people? And so that's something that I think is really important that needs to be discussed even more.
Yeah. Jaymie, Jaymie, I have a question for you, and this is where I kind of want to deal with that. We're talking about this, but it doesn't seem that Black women have this issue. It is not that Black women are, as Uncle Ronnie pointed out, dealing with whether liberation or institutionalization. Right? This is a Black male issue, and so can you tell us why it is Black men in particular that are wrestling with this?
Well, I'm going to touch another sore spot here. Regarding that, I'm happy that you asked that question. But one of the reasons why we think, and I will say think because I don't have all the research data to support this, but based on my reading and stuff like that, is that because of the Black male privilege, most of our Black women have failed, or not have failed, but have been stifled from sharing some of the struggles that they face. Because if we look at our Black institutions or churches, we recognize that the leadership is male. When we talk about freedom fighters, we talk about Dr. King, and he was a great guy. I love him. He's a mentor of mine. But we talk about Malcolm X, but you never hear about the women behind them and the struggles that women went through. When you look at the black and white pictures, you recognize that it was fixed, it was painted with young ladies and older women moving through. So we have not really given a platform for our Afrocentric women to speak exactly about the struggles that they have in our church and elsewhere. So I think the onus is on us as Black males. I'm just sticking that in there so we could take that up at another point. But as a father of 2 girls and a mother who I love dearly and sisters who I love dearly, that is an area that as Black male, we have to be careful that we're not reversing the psychology of white privilege on our female counterparts that we have in our setting. Now, the question that you asked is, why is it that we don't have that many struggle with our females? I think that our makeup, and I'm not trying to sound sexist, and I'm not, and if I sound that way, I beg for forgiveness. I'm coming from a perfect position. I may use the wrong words to categorize and classify what I'm trying to say here. But I think the subcultures that we're coming from as Black males we have been so submerged in it. The voice or the action that we use to respond to the negativity that we have faced has further painted us in a corner. And society expects us to use strength and force. Hence, we end up receiving the ultimate punishment of our actions. On the other hand, our sisters have found a different way of dealing with it. Hence, they may not make the headlines at all times, but it doesn't mean that they are not facing some of the challenges that we are facing in different settings and in different makeup. But while I may get big on a police officer or whatever, my sister may cringe because she's not as big or as strong, but inside she still bears the same weight, the same burden, the same pain. When her boss pass a rude comment at her that talks about her physiology, she still feels as if a bucket of cold water was thrown on her. But because of the way that she's expected to respond within her Black community and outside of her Black church, she keeps it in and finds other ways of channeling that pain and that frustration. So for me to definitively say whether or not they are facing it, it's better if I say, or safer for me to say, that they have chosen different ways of exercising their pain that comes along with the lack of support that has been given in our community and also within our church setting.
Corey, I need for you to elucidate on that particular question that you just asked, because you have some salient thoughts about that too. So can you kind of take off your moderator hat and just on this piece? You know, you wax with that privilege and so forth, but please.
I mean, it's a real thing. Audre Lorde has a quote, and I'm paraphrasing Audre Lorde, but she talks about the struggle for freedom and for liberation. She says that white women struggle in the fight for freedom and liberation because while they are women, they are white. And she said that Black men even struggle in the full fight for freedom and liberation because while they are Black, they are still men. What Audre Lorde argues is that Black women are in the proper position of true oppression, where they are both Black and woman. They have no position of privilege. And I say that to say this. It might be, you all have hinted to it, it might be that Black women might be the ones who would actually help us understand the need for true autonomy, even in this season, because that's still the elephant in the room. If Black men are leading the Black church, or if Black men are leading the Adventist church as it exists, Black men still hold positions of power and privilege, even within the structure. Let's just keep it honest. Right. And so because while we are Black, we are still men, we are not willing to divest to some degree of our privilege and our positions of prosperity for the true liberation of our people. I think that if we actually polled our women and asked them how they feel about the institution and what it does to us psychologically and sociologically, there might be more of a radical view for liberation and autonomy than even our brothers are willing to talk about and are willing to face. And I genuinely believe that. I think, however, I want to deal with this. There are two men, two pastors, my father-in-law and Dr. Norman Miles, who was my senior pastor when I was an intern at the Trinity Temple Church in Newark. And I was asking both of them about both of their ministries are attractive to Black men. Both of their Black men are engaged in the church. They have never had an issue with talking to Black men and preaching and just kind of having men active and engaged in their churches. And so I was asking them, how did you do it? But one person said to me, my father-in-law, he said to me, he says, oftentimes in the Black church, how we are taught to preach, and it goes to pastors, is that we are taught to preach to the wife, and the husband is listening in on the conversation. And that in the preaching moment, the pastor is trained to preach to the wife, whether it's language, whether it's anecdotes, illustrations, and even to some degree content. We are taught to preach to the wife, and the husband is listening in. And that was mind-blowing. And then Dr. Miles says, oftentimes we have been taught as pastors to create a liturgy style and a ministry style that that can be, and for lack of a better term, effeminate to the men in the room. He said, I don't ask men to close their eyes. I don't, you know what I'm saying? He said, I understand brothers. And so I want to know, and I am a pastor, and you all have grown up in churches. Have you all noticed that when it comes from the pastors and from preachers, it seems as if our ministry is to women, and men, we are expected to either catch on or catch the remnant, or listen in, but does it seem like our ministry is towards women, and how can we as pastors and as leaders change that? Whoever wants to jump in.
Wow. If I was to distill down to one word as it pertains to Black men, I believe that operative word would be relationships. Brothers love relationships, especially with women. And it's important to a brother to have cogent, healthy relationships. But say, for instance, he is trying to date a sister, but she will only talk to him twice a week. How do you think that relationship would actually go or end up? So how do you think a brother feels about a Black church who only wants to speak to him twice a week, but closed all the other times? No access. You're not important. What's important to you, we're not dealing with. And so forth. So the reestablishing of relationships means that that door needs to be open 7 days a week. That there needs to be something that a brother can see that he has benefit from, access to, unequivocally, that is geared not only to the Black woman, but also in his felt unique needs also. There is no real true relationship with the Black church and Black men in the village.
Wow.
It's just a 2-day-a-week thing. And they're not accessing that because their relationship style is, I want you all the time, everywhere, anywhere, anytime.
Wow. Dr. Freeman, Jaymie, you want to hop in?
I like that very much because, and I think just to piggyback of what Pastor Ronnie just made mention is that relationship equals results. But if you seek results first, then you may end up without relationships.
Wow.
I think what may be happening also is that our church leaders are playing the songs to the percentage, and the percentage says that we may have a plus or 5% difference in terms of who or what our congregation is made up of, forgetting that by doing that, we are destabilizing the family structure, which involves a man and a woman, because if we're not speaking to both, then at some point we'll lose one or the other. So the language that is used in terms of how we construct our programs must not just be appealing, but must be something that has a 7-day furlong connection with those who you're trying to engage. There's no engagement if you're not putting out something that appeals to the natural areas of a person or of a gender, if you want to put it that way, not by trying to stake a gender to the pole, I'm saying here. But I think those are some of the things that are missing. And I could tell you this, I moved to Florida recently, and I am in a Sabbath school class with my son, and I have been in Sabbath school class since a kid. And right off the bat, I recognize, I've been so accustomed to 2 girls, I'm being honest, to the point where now sometimes I forget, Elder Ronnie, that I have a son. I'll be like, hey, my girls, let's go. And my wife is like, Jaymie, you have a son too. And I'm like, hey, Jaymie, let's go. But when I'm in the setting and the setup, I recognize there are times when the younger girls are more engaged in the Sabbath school setting, because when I go back in my boyish mind, I recognize that what is being presented would not have appealed to me as a youngster going through the process. So I'm saying now that we have to be careful of our language. we also have to think about the fact that it's relationship then results. And if we married those two things, then we'll have our church flourishing with young males who will feel the sense of purpose and a sense of belonging in our Black church.
Dr. Freeman?
Yeah, so as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about just um, this balance between preparing young Black men to be sensitive to our sisters as we grow. So for instance, Tamara Lomax, a both an Africana studies professor, but also a trained theologian, talked about Black feminism and this idea of growing Black males as feminists, right? And so one of the things that I have done, I was challenged in an article that I had written with Mari Jackson about the history of the Black Seventh-day Adventist Church and and I addressed kind of the history back in the 1800s up till now, but a female pastor challenged me around one of the critical issues was women's ordination, and she said that my lens in the article was related to just Blackness, and a lot of the quotes were from Black males, but what about Black females? And so what I had, one of the things I did was talk to her offline. And what I did was I opened up the platform. So I spoke with the editor to provide platform for her. And then I wrote in response and in conversation with her. And so for us to now begin to think about ways in which we provide space for our women while also attending to our needs is going to be really, really important as we move forward in the future.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? Have?
I want to drop one quick word here. When as adults we make a mistake, we have a tendency sometimes to overcompensate. In the act of overcompensating, sometimes we leave something or someone or an act or an object or whatever it is out of the picture. Sometimes we operate from a guilt complex, and from a guilt complex, we put ourselves in a worse off position. We have to ask God for forgiveness as leaders of our Black church in terms of what we have done and how we have treated one group or other groups or all groups. And then we have to look to move forward equitably in terms of how we operate moving forward. Because if we fail to do that, we will lose the significance of the impact that we should have in terms of how we minister to the flock and how we minister to all our groups. And we'll end up losing groups. And once you lose one part, you are negatively impacting the group that you already have. And the studies show that the millennials at this point, in terms of the African-American males and Afrocentric males, the numbers are going down in terms of their submission or participation in the Black church. It means that they see within us some things that are not clear to them in how we have been going about how we do church. And that's not good for us. And they find themselves in other churches that fail to reflect or represent some of the areas that they're lacking in and the needs that they have.
If I could jump in really quick, I think it's going to be really important as we move forward as a church to think about black male ministry from the beginning. So one of the things that there's a big push and conversation going on about when we're thinking about putting a panel together, right? We need to be thinking about women from the beginning, not coming up who our favorite speaker is or who our favorite people are, and then go from there, but being very intentional about first starting with who is not being represented, right? And so I think in this context, when we develop ministries, we need to be thinking about developing ministries specifically related to men, but also when we're doing just general ministries, how can those things have a targeted nature to our men in our church?
Well, this situation, I believe, and the broader context of it all, and this is in my own thought, and maybe I should just put a disclaimer in right now that the comments that I'm about to make does not necessarily reflect the Alleghenies conference and so forth. But I do believe that what we're talking about cannot be done by reshuffling chairs on the deck of the Titanic. I am a proponent for sovereignty. Sovereignty for regional conferences, sovereignty for Oakwood University, sovereignty for Pine Forge Academy, and sovereignty for Message Magazine. To come under sovereignty, which is the next logical step, and so forth, will now put the onus, responsibility, accountability on us solely, and not using our energies and our depleted reserves to deal with a racist system while trying to do the things of equity and balance and for our families and communities that we need to do. And you will hear me put sovereignty.
Yeah.
You know.
But if we
please go. Yeah.
But if we're talking about sovereignty, that goes to this idea of decolonizing our mind, right? Because we can have leaders. We can't have leaders in senior positions that their mind, like if you present that, listen, we need to be in control of our own resources and our own things, and they're just concerned about their own retirement, that they've been in the system for this long, and so why would we rock the boat and those things. So there has to be an education to even our leaders, and those who will be the next generation of leaders. We have to make sure that their minds are decolonized before talking about, well, in concert with talking about sovereignty.
You guys, give me 1 second, Jaymie. Because what you guys are bringing out is that it is possible that as Black men and within the church, and I think we are all leaders within the church, and we have time in the church. What I'm noticing is that how we both treat our brothers and how we view ourselves, how we do ministry to our brothers, how we treat and relate to our sisters may have been impacted by the toxicity of white American Christianity.
Definitely.
Can we establish that white American Christianity has informed or has impacted how we relate, or how we have lost our brothers who have become aware of themselves and who have become aware of their Blackness, and who have an understanding of social ills and injustice, and are righteously angry about it. We have alienated them. We have adopted the treatment of women from white American Christianity, and we've seen ourselves, watch this, through a lens in which we believe that colonization is necessary so that we don't act out of or so that we don't act wrong. I mean, I'm reading a book right now. It's a good book, The Color of Compromise. Mm-hmm. And what the writer talked about the fact that Christianity was needed that Christianity, that the slaves needed Christianity so that they would not act as animals or act as savages. Now they knew that Christianity, if it is presented in whole, would cause the slaves to rebel and to fight for liberation. So they picked and choose what aspects of Christianity they wanted to indoctrinate the slaves with, so that the slaves would see Christianity and colonization as something that would quell their animal instincts. And it is possible that the Black church has adopted this narrative, and that the Black church has adopted this motif. And my fear is that we will be having a conversation about the exit of Black men, but in 15 years or 10 years, we'll also be having the conversation about the exit of Black women as well, especially and Gen Z Black women. I feel that exit is coming, and it is the next generation's awareness, because they're reading Audre Lorde, they're reading Bell Hooks. They are leading when it comes to radical liberation. And so what we have, how do we decolonize our minds? How do we fight against the lie and the pathology that has been passed down to us from white American Christianity, even within the context of the Seventh-day Adventist Church?
I'm going to say this real quickly, and thank you for asking that question, is that I think I don't know if it was one of those great speakers I was listening to him a few weeks ago, but he said something in the essence of, you cannot cure cancer with over-the-counter drugs. You cannot cure something that is life-threatening by just going to the pharmacy and say, I need me some Advil. When you have certain things that are structurally wrong, it means that you have to dig that bad boy out. You sometimes have to lose a leg. You have to sometimes bleed first before you could grow again. And if we fail to do that, the Black church will be relegated into antiquity. We will find ourselves in New York and seeing pictures like that's what the Black church looked like. And that's the way the preachers spoke. Do you remember, Jaymie? Do you remember Mr. Johnson? That's the way they spoke. That was the Black church. And this is how they spoke. That will soon be part of our rhetoric when we speak. We'll be using it in pantomimes and stuff like that in a matter of time if we fail to make those adjustments now. Now, in terms of taking off that slavery mentality, this is how difficult it is. It is so difficult. You cannot become more than what you have experienced, and you cannot move beyond what you're willing to confront. It means that even if the bad things that we have inherited has served to benefit us in some means, we have to relegate them and we have to start facing up to the ills that they're causing. Not because this bad thing got me to the front of the line means that it's the best thing for everybody else. We have to change that mindset as if because I'm in the house and I'm serving means that those on the outside, tough luck on them. Hopefully, in the next 10 or 15 years, they'll have somebody who's as light as I am, and they'll make their way to the master house or the master bedroom. We have to change that, and it comes with us willing to make that brave and bold move. And that brave and bold move means that we'll have to use the rhetoric that may not be accepted by the mainstream of those who support and endorse us. And when we do that, maybe my generation may not be able to see it if God fails to return, but what will happen is in a matter of time, we will have greater strength in our community, and our people will feel a sense of belonging, a sense of pride, and our Black women and Black men will understand that I can be the best that I could be based on how I was created, as opposed to pining after something that they inherited from slavery, abuse, and the fact that we were brought to this land from our motherland. And not until we have that kind of conversation, willing to lose in an effort to grow, we're going to remain in a rocking chair, moving backwards and forward, but not leaving the shore.
Uncle Ronnie, can you hop in here?
There is an adage that says the most important decisions are the most informed decisions. And Dr. John Henry Clark, one of my favorite historians, an ancestor now, he said that Europeans not only colonized lands and people, they also colonized information. So if we're looking at being informed, there is information now that is privy to us that can help decolonize our minds, and it's not all in the Bible. You see, but there are the undergirdings of principles that could assist us in information so that we can take this information and put it against the disinformation that has been shoved down our throats. And then not only to deconstruct and not even reconstruct, but totally replace that faulty information so that when we free our minds, our butts can follow.
Dr. Freeman.
Yeah, so I'm writing down some notes here. I'm thinking about the preaching in our church. I think this time for our conference, our regional conference presidents, uh, to even encourage our pastors to preach from a place of liberation, and so to encourage them to read information that addresses not only Adventist, our current Adventist theology, but also it draws from Black liberation theology and other liberation theologies. I think places like the Bradford Cleveland Brooks Leadership Center needs to be challenged around when we're developing leadership trainings. It should be also infused with themes around Black liberation. I'm thinking about our curriculum in our schools. My area is education. We need to look at a curriculum in our schools. And a gentleman by the name of Kofi Lamote, he just came out with a book entitled African Centered Teaching and Curriculum. And so he's looking at in American classrooms how we could look at our curriculum in such or teach our curriculum in such a way that it's infused with African centric principles and values. And we can't be afraid of that. I think we've been taught to be afraid of our history and ourselves. And so I think challenging our leaders, pushing our leaders to be thinking in that way, and then for them to empower their pastors and on down. And I'll say this last thing. I listened to Pastor Bird today, and he was really addressing issues of social justice. And I think our pastors need to be willing to be forthright regarding some of the issues impacting our community.
That's good. Jaymie?
I think what is so easy, it is so easy, but yet so difficult, because if it's practice, a lot of us will be losing our grounds, our footing, and it will hit the financial nerve of our very institution and organization. If, and I'm saying if with all certainty, if all our leaders from the general conference all the way down should say this, and I'm putting it out there, if they should say this, let all churches and all people and all institution that is aligned with the church find its identity in Christ, sola scriptura, there would be a difference immediately. But the problem is, should I state the problem, Uncle Ronnie?
I'm not interrupting you.
The problem is that there's too much to be lost if that should be implemented.
Yeah.
But there's so many that will be lost if we fail to practice that.
Yeah.
If we should go back to finding our identity in Christ as a church, as a people, as speakers, whatever we do that is attached to the church. But the question that I have to pose to you gentlemen here, even though you're the ones who pose questions, is that the question is, why is it that we are so afraid to find our identity in Christ as a church, as a Black church, as a white church, as a conference, as a general conference?
Well, if I could just jump in really quick.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've talked to some of our elders when I challenge them around some of our doctrinal issues, are not necessarily even doctrinal issues. It's more of things that have been caught, as Uncle Ronnie would say. The challenge becomes that that person says, my mother taught me to do it that way, and my father taught me to do it that way, or the elder when I was growing up taught me. So that means that they were wrong, right? And that's a chilling thing for people when they have to say, people that they respected, that they may have been wrong, even though we now have new light, and we're approaching. So maybe in the past we did not approach our the way in which we practice our 7-day Adventism from a culturally responsive way, right? And so now you have a generation that's pushing for that, and it may go against what we historically have done. And so there are people that, if you said that we needed to have our own, we were like AME or Kojic and had our own denomination, that they would say, well, I've invested all these years into this system. And so even though I may agree with you in principle, I can't give that up. And so that's a part of some of the struggle that we're going to have, even generationally, kind of dealing with it.
Well, and to kind of shift us a little bit, as our time has been really well spent, somebody said in the comments, I think this is one of the biggest challenges millennials deal with. And I think that is a true statement. We started this conversation talking, and we shared some statistics talking about the impact that the Black church has on Black men. So socially, we talked about that, and we kind of established that, and we understand that so then it would suggest that our communities and the livelihood and the survival of our communities are dependent on young men having encounters with God and becoming a part of his body, young Black men. That the survival of our community is dependent on that. If that is the case, then we have to be willing to say, I have to do what's best for my community. And I think that is something that we as Black men in the church have to be willing to embrace, that we have a responsibility to our community, to our people that do not attend our schools, that do not go to our churches, that are not in our conferences, but are living on our streets. We have cousins, we have uncles who they send their wives to church every Sabbath, but they stay home. We have young men who want nothing to do with church, and our communities are waiting on us to present a Jesus. Let's be honest, us to present a Jesus that is not the whitewashed chaplain of American Christianity. We have been tasked to present a community. You see, even the term institution is whitewashed.
Yes.
It's a whitewashed term. It's a hierarchical term. We are supposed to create a community. Come on, somebody, a family, an organism that is and Uncle Ronnie talked about this, that is interdependent. You know what I'm saying? And so it's going to take a paradigm shift, but it's going to take us having a dogged, radical love and care for our people, that we say we have a mandate to reach them. I think we are getting ready. We're going to ask you see in the comments, please begin to send. If you have any questions, send them in now. If you have any questions, send them in now. We are going to get ready for our question time. We are so excited. We are going to get ready for our question time in about 6 minutes. We are going to get ready for our question time in about 6 minutes. So send in your questions now. And I'm going to ask you this, Uncle Ronnie, how do we deal with the wrestling match? Sometimes it seems of being Christian, and we know what the loaded sense of that word and what that title means, and how it has been co-opted and corrupted, especially here in the West, of being both Christian and Black men. And then how do we synthesize that? How do we deal with that wrestling match? Because if you are a Black man and you are read and you are understood, you have your eyes open, it should bring to some degree a wrestling match in this context. So how do you deal with that wrestling match?
Well, I guess a couple ways, because, like, say for instance, when I'm in the village and I'm doing my work and doing what I need to do in the village. Say for instance, I'm in a context that they ask me to pray. So I will pray and I will open up with our Creator. And then I will end my prayer with, and I ask this in the names your children call you. You see, I'm not drawing Christian walls and denominational walls in the village, in community. I'm seeking to open this thing up. But this is one of my premises. I believe that all that we need to do, and what you just said, Corey, can be best done under sovereignty.
Yeah.
Now, having said that, because we're totally accountable and responsible to ourselves and not to somebody else.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is this, and I know Jaymie said, some people, you got to say some hard things or deal with the hard questions. It is my belief, and only mine, and I know I'll get pushed back, that we don't need another church plant. What we need are community center plants. Brothers will not come, a lot of them, into churches. But if there's a community center where we can have daycare, where we can employ people from the community, where we can have programs, where we can have music lessons and writing workshops for young people and all this kind of stuff. And if somebody wants to have a small group for spiritual study or something in there, then it is more holistic. It is more attractive to community, where brother will come into community center and not necessarily a church. I think that when we shift this paradigm and it is going into community, we can't have this edifice mentality. Let them build me a sanctuary that they might. Unless you're going to get down like Dr. Myron Edmondson, he's building a high school in that spot and a cafeteria in that spot and so forth. But other than that, let's make community plants, community center plants, where we are now with the people. We are doing things for the people. I got 1,000 ideas from being in community for my whole call for 39 years, but that's just one of them. But if we think that doing all we want to do in a church is actually going to pull off what needs to be done for community, no, it ain't gonna work.
I had a friend of mine, young man, millennial friend of mine, grew up in church, and he said one thing I struggled with church, and he's to some degree disengaged, but he said one thing I struggle with in church is that I'm just coming to sit and listen to someone tell me what they think. That's what he said that he struggles with. He said, I just don't want to sit down and listen to someone tell me what they think. And a lot of what we've made church is a man telling another man or woman, sit and listen and let me tell you what I think, instead of what seemed to be the early church model, which was coming and doing community together.
Yeah,
that was the early church model. The church before it was corrupted by Romanism. Let's be honest, this is where history matters. Before the church was corrupted by Romanism, it was the early church that saw church not as a top-down man speaking to everybody, a man or woman speaking to everybody else, but it was wrestling together, doing community together, bearing one another's burdens. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that might be what brothers are looking for. You said authentic relationship. Authentic relationship. And so that's a good point. I mean, people don't want just come sit, listen. People want to be engaged.
And what they did under that early church, they did under sovereignty, because they pulled up from the orthodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
It went on their own. They had profit sharing. I mean, a whole lot of stuff went on there. Yeah.
Bible said they had all things in common and no one was without.
Mm.
If we look at the
go ahead, Jaymie.
If we look at Acts and the model of the small church and the high level of involvement that it entails, that speaks directly to what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's where we'll have success, and that's where we'll have growth. If we look at the Acts model of involvement and engagement of small church and groups and involvement, that's where difference happens.
Man, listen, this has been a great conversation. This has been an awesome conversation. I'm ready for some questions. Are y'all ready for some questions, or are y'all tired? I don't think y'all, y'all just getting revved up. Get ready for some questions. So we're about to we're going to go for a break. We're going to take a really quick commercial break. At the other side of this commercial break, we are going to look at some questions our panelists, man, they're fresh, they're ready. We're gonna look at some questions on the other side of this commercial break, real quick.
The Relationship Ministries Department of the Allegheny East Conference is a family of ministries that seeks to engage, enrich, and empower families, men, singles, couples, and parents to have healthy and whole relationships. To access the many resources we have available to you, your church, or your family, visit us on the web at www.visitaec.org/relationshipmin.
Amen. Again, we want to thank you all for tuning in. This has been a fulfilling discussion for me. I'm glad to be a part of it. We want to thank the Relationship Ministries of the Allegheny East Conference, led by Dr. David Defoe, facilitating this conversation on the Black church and Black men. We're now going to look at some of the questions that we have. And we'll kind of just throw it out there round robin for you all to answer some of the questions. So let's look at some of the questions that we have coming forward from our chat. One person, if once or twice per week is not good enough to form a relationship, what are some of the practical programs we could use to reach the typical African-American male? Good question. If once, twice per week is not good enough to form a relationship, what are some of the practical programs we could use to reach the typical African-American male? Ronnie, I'm gonna ask you to kick off that question, and then whoever wants to jump in after can jump in, since you kind of brought that up.
Back in the 1980s, I wrote a manual, and it is still available, called Communiversity. And this is continuing education to the community, where the church is open 7 days a week, and it becomes the center of education without a Sabbath hook in it and without proselytizing. It is a non-proselytizing, where you take every profession and vocation, whether it's business persons or whatever, a group of them can teach entrepreneurial skills to the community, maybe on Monday, on Tuesday, but every professional vocation where people can work within the areas of their expertise, so they're not out of their comfort zone. Communiversity will help this entity be the center of education for 7 days a week. It has a course side to it, and it has a seminar side to it. It's called Communiversity. I wrote that back in the 80s. It's still relevant today, and the churches can stay open 7 days a week.
And what was the name of that book?
It's a manual I wrote called Communiversity.
Okay.
And so they have to come to me, contact me to get that, because I did not post that on my website, prepareyouth.org, with my other books.
Okay. Communiversity, that's powerful. Anyone else have a practical thing that we can do to help us do church 7 days a week to attract Black men from the community? Anyone else want to hop in there?
I think what Pastor Ronnie just made mention is something that I think churches could immediately move on in terms of enforcing. And if churches have to pool their resources together to do that, I think in addition to that is that if the church is actively engaged in the community, then the church will recognize what the needs are in the community. I think two things that are needed in that 7-day process is to offer coaching and mentorship for our young Black male. Coaching and mentorship, meaning that a mentor is the one who guides them, who have been there. And then coach is someone who pulls out from our young Black males what they may not have recognized. And we clearly understand that in our Afrocentric community, there are a number of Black males who are left without an understanding because of what they've seen, and it prevents them from looking beyond where they're at, because they've seen everyone around them stop at a certain place where poverty and all those things are what plague their community. So I think adding to that, but I think what Pastor Ronnie just made mention of, I think that's something that our churches could start pooling together and create in our communities, so that we could offer opportunities, we could offer development, and we could give our community hope, because I think that's one of the greatest things that are holding back our Black or males, hope in terms of expanding from where they are.
Another question. Whose responsibility is it to engage the regional conference leaders and pastors in this conversation? Are they viewing the series? If not, then what? That is a great question. Whose responsibility is it to engage our Black Regional Adventist Conference presidents and leaders on these issues and with some of the things that we've raised? Whose responsibility is it?
I think it's all of us. So I think as members, I say that I invest 10% of my salary, and if you count offering, another 5 to 10% into the system. So that should give me some voice in saying how things operate. And so I think that it's all of our responsibility, but I think we should empower some of our younger ministers who are really coming up with some fresh and new ideas, but may not necessarily have the clout within the system to get some of those ideas implemented. But if you have the membership behind you, I think that things could move along.
I totally concur with that, Sydney, and I thought about that also, and I put it in this, because sometimes somebody will say to me, by whose authority are you saying this stuff, Vanderhorst or whatever, talking about sovereignty and pulling up and so forth. And it's by the authority of being a stakeholder.
Yes, sir. Say that again.
We deal with corporations, and people understand the fiduciary trusts, that is for stakeholders. Presidents of boards and executive committees and so forth are responsible to stakeholders for their existence or whatever else like that. That is by the authority, that the leadership should listen. But I do give a warning. This is regional conferences' last chance. Because this generation is not married to this system.
Yeah.
And they will bounce, not so much from being disgruntled, but more so because they have vision and gifts and abilities that are broader than the defined parameters of this system will permit them. And they've got to do their kingdom assignments with or without this system. But this is the last chance to keep them. But it has to be, a total opening and listening, not only of leadership, but there needs to be a replacement of leadership. I'm going to be real honest. If many of these presidents were in the corporate world, their heads would have rolled years ago. Gone. And so to half step and to offer placebos to this thinking generation and discerning Black people, that stuff ain't gonna fly no more. Let me get back down off my horse here.
No, you're absolutely right. You're talking about a generation. I look at for myself, and I'm a millennial pastor. I'm a Black millennial pastor. Went to Oakwood, and I pastored here in the Allegheny East Conference. We are talking about a generation that has seen gross wealth inequality. The election of Donald J. Trump. We were 21 years old when Trayvon Martin was murdered and his killer was let walk away. We were raised under the Black Lives Matter movement, and we have not seen the greatest days of the regional work. We have not seen it. The histories of these grand churches being full, they are pictures to us. They are not something that we have experienced to see. They're not things that we have seen directly. You are talking about millennials who are less likely to be tied or loyal to institutions in general, whether that is political parties, whether that is religious institutions, whether that is a grocery store in the street. They are going for what's best, for what speaks to them, and for what gives them a sense of purpose. You are absolutely right in the warning that you put out there, that it is a warning that we need to take seriously. We need to get serious about it. Our people are going to increasingly want liberation. They're going to want a religious, spiritual experience that speaks to their whole persons, where they feel seen, not tolerated, but appreciated, that their friends and family members who have disengaged from the white American Christian church will have an encounter with the brown Jesus who was lynched on a tree, and they will see their communities radically changed. I think you're 100% right on that. Jaymie, what were you about to say?
I think that while we anticipate great change in terms of leadership from our different groups or corporations. I think at this point we're looking for something global. What I like to say to ministers, individual ministers from individual communities at this point, while we're looking for great change from a global standpoint, I think the onus is on us at this point to make individual changes within our community and within our congregation. I think if we start with that grassroots approach at this point, as Pastor Ronnie said, that people will see that we mean change, and people will at some point catch a glimpse of what you're doing, and in the long term want to reflect or mimic the model that you're sharing. I want to go back to it, Pastor Ronnie, if you don't mind me saying it. Well, Pastor Ronnie said something here, and I think that all the ministers who are listening at this point, you need to reach out to Pastor Ronnie Vanderhorst and find out about that manuscript that he put together. Because if there's ever time that our community needs this, it's now. And if we fail to do this, then what will happen is that they will fail to invest confidence in our capacity, our capability to move them forward. And all they'll see us as are like old picture paintings with no motion behind it. So the time is ripe and the harvest is now, and we have to make those moves in our local areas and do what you need. And I think that the people are so ready. They're so ready, like a ripe fruit. They're ready, they're just waiting for us to pick them, or professionals, and say, guess what? We need you to serve. People are hungering to do something to create an impact, but the people need leadership. And if the leadership can't be infiltrated globally, we have to do it in our local community. So that's my word to our local leaders in our small churches or small communities, whatever it is. See what the needs are in your community and create an uprising in terms of transforming the lives of those who you serve.
Good point. The next question. Name the things that we can start in the communities now. Well, we talked about communiversity and around the clock ministries. And not just ministry, and I say ministry, I'm not talking about proselytizing. I'm talking about people development, right? That's what we're talking about, people development. I would also say it changes how we preach from the pulpit. Are you preaching the gospel through the lens and motif of liberation? You know what I'm saying? Are you preaching the gospel? Are you teaching? Are you teaching a presentation of the white American Jesus, or are you teaching are you giving a presentation? Are you preaching about the Jewish carpenter who was hung by the state unjustly, the brown man who was a carpenter's son, working class man who was hung by the state unjustly? So what are you talking about? Who are you talking about? Teaching and Dr. Free, we talked about this. Our education is something we can just change right now. What we say in our pedagogy. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think it's just so important that we look at our curriculum. So I was taught, for instance, that William Foy, for those who are viewing and may not, that name doesn't resonate with you, but in the early 1800s, he was the person who God originally gave some revelations to, as it relates to the second coming of Jesus Christ, right? And so we were taught, well, I was taught that he denied the call to ministry, and so God had to give it to Ellen White, and that's why Ellen White is kind of the major founder and things like that. It was only until Delbert Baker, the former president of Oakwood University, did some research, and he found no, he didn't deny the call. It was that at that time there were whites that did not want to accept the message from a black man. And so it's so important now to have a curriculum that not only informs us about our blackness in general, but also our history within the church. And so a lot of the research that I've been doing within the last 5 years has been re-looking at our church, at our church history, and not starting with what we've been taught, but actually going back to the idea of who has presented idea of the second coming of Christ, and you'll find that in America there were slave songs and there were black hymns in the late 1700s that was talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ. That was before William Miller.
Yeah, that's
right?
yeah.
And so when we're looking at our curriculum, within our Black SDA schools, I think a push needs to be there for us to to add upon what we have now, and to include a more holistic perspective on the history of us in relationship to the church.
That's a really good point, and it goes back to the need for sovereignty and autonomy. The next question is the current structure of the church, from the GC mothership on down to the local church, built for change to better the Black person?
No.
Dr. Naim Akbar, one of our African-American psychologists, said that when he was talking about behavioral scientists and modalities and so forth, he said European modalities are for Europeans, basically. And so to try to use Eurocentric modalities, on Black people, there's a big challenge there. And, it just really doesn't work well at all. So when you have a Eurocentric constructs are basically for Europeans. It's as simple as that. And the problem of I guess regional conferences, Black people have been trying to fit these square pegs into round holes, and they're not fitting. In fact, it was so bad that's how regional conferences actually got started, because these Eurocentric modalities were not working. But I will say this finally, is that regional conferences are in an incomplete state of growth, just like the civil rights movement is an incomplete stage of growth. Until there is autonomy, until there is sovereignty, it will not be what it should be, and regional conferences may end up being the conferences that might have been.
You're speaking to the total liberation of our people. That's what it seems you're talking about, a holistic, total liberation of our people. I think we have a few more questions, but anybody want to jump in on that question right there? Jaymie, Dr. Freeman.
I dropped off a little bit. Go ahead. I dropped off the question. So
the total liberation of our people. There is a need for that, and I think that we're at a point in time where we need to have that open conversation about that. I think that I've done a lot of research on Black Adventist history. When I think about W.W. Fordham and guys like Owen Troy Sr. and others, they weren't punks, right? So I remember going to the DC archives and looking at documents, and I'm saying they were telling the DC president, they were very straightforward about what they wanted and demanded. And I don't see our leaders doing the same thing, our current leaders. And a part of that, one is they know a partial, they know a part of our history, even our leaders, but they don't have a holistic perspective on our history. And the truth is that a lot of us now that are middle class, upper middle class, and we're trying to keep what we have, right? And so if it comes between me securing what I have and then liberating the broader group, the broader spectrum of our community, I think sometimes the broader swath of our community gets the short end of that stick.
Yep.
Jaymie. Go ahead, Jaymie.
I think it was well said. I think the fear of failure and the fear of losing positioning and relevance is what prevents us from moving towards totally liberating ourselves from exactly what has held us back as a people. So there must be a willingness to be bold, to be brave, to be courageous in terms of doing that, with the understanding that we'll have to own up to what comes our way as we look to push forward. Understand that greater growth is beyond the struggle that we'll face when we make the push in that direction.
This is going to happen even if it's only with younger women and men ministers. It's going to happen to have Sabbath keeping fellowships, but not Seventh-day Adventists, but they will be Christ-centered, Afrocentric, community-based. It's going to sovereignty will happen. Yeah. Those who want to stay, they'll just stay.
There were two more questions that we want to get at. One was from Holly Fisher Hickman, and then the last one we want to deal with is from Lola Moore Johnson. So these are going to be our last two questions. I think they're going to bring out a lot of conversation before we end this part of a continuing dialogue. Holly says, I will rephrase. Can one of the outcomes from this series be a curriculum written that insert these principles spoken, including Black liberation, in parentheses, James Cone, womanism, not white feminism, good point, and women theological standpoints, i.e. Cheryl Wilkes? Can we put together a curriculum that helps us better understand as Black Adventist people our history, our theology, and the needs of our church and our people based on looking at some of these areas?
I think it can be and should be, and I'm saying this ahead because I'm going to have to be leaving in shortly. I'm doing a Black Family Life Matters for a non-Adventist group at 6 o'clock. It's a series for 7 weeks. But so I'll just insert this real quick. I think it can be done and it should be done. I believe that instead of a responsibility, and she's not suggesting that on one person, that these particular demographics who have the expertise in these particular areas can not only add to the curriculum, but I also see an anthology coming out of this too, where you're having different essays and inputs and so forth on these particular topics that she has posited.
And we definitely can put together a reading list, a standard reading list for some of the things that we are discussing. We will have resources that we definitely can put together a standard reading list. And it's going to be our last question for this conversation. Can you all elaborate on what sovereignty would look like? How do we create culture and buy-in from the ground as Black people, recapturing our African communal roots?
Well, I'll say it real quick since I have to go, and it's just piecemeal. There has to be a strategic plan. First of all, there has to be the courage of individuals for sovereignty. When a man or woman doesn't fear death, you cannot be hurt anymore, you see. And so therefore, getting the blowback and the pushback and the criticism from people because of sovereignty and so forth, that just comes with it. But I do think that a strategic plan needs to be put together. And that strategic plan will include a financial plan to see how this will be financed, if there are those who are employed by it, the pay and so forth. It has to be a holistic plan that deals with the education piece, the cultural piece, the piece for the children, because Dr. Francis Cress Welsing said that children are the future of a people. I'm quoting, any meaningful discussion in the future of Black people must be predicated upon that people's maximal development of its children. So as Dr. Sid referred to, that education piece, that has to be in there. So I think that all those components can come together for sovereignty. And there is sole accountability and responsibility on that group of people to make that thing happen. But I see a whole influx of support and finances and so forth. In fact, brothers and sisters are waiting.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think just to follow up with that, sovereignty in terms of the sense of authenticity, in terms of moving it forward. I think people are tired of promises, and they're tired of the placebos, and they're tired of just us trying to water down and whitewash the true impact of who they are. If we are supposed to secure the confidence and investment of our community, they have to see like this: what is in it for me? How is this going to advance me and advance our generation? How are you going to put me forward as a people? How are you catering for my needs and my difference and the unique things about me, my culture, my advancement, my education, my mental health? You name the different things. We have to look at that. And if we fail to provide that education and then showcase through a strategic lens, that we're going to move it forward so we could have checkpoints in terms of how we're growing and how we're impacting our community, then people will just sit back and laugh at us, because this would be just another motive. The last thing I want to say on this is, Pastor Johnson asked a question earlier. The reason why many of our Black folks are disengaged too is that many of our leaders are still trying to court them. They're still trying to motivate them. They're still trying to inspire them. They're still trying to take them on the first date. So it means that no teaching has not yet occurred. And because teaching has not occurred, then you cannot lead them. Because we know that the instantaneous gratification lasts in the salivary amylase for just a minute or a time. And after a period, it's gone. So what's happening now that our people, they're leaving us because that taste that we give them to stimulate them needs some meat on the bone, just as Pastor Ronnie Vanderhorst made mention of. And the people, they are tired and they're waiting, and we must act now in an authentic way, not copying and pasting what has served to imprison them and impoverish them for decades and thinking that will draw them. Nah, 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 nah. The millennial group at this point are like, you trick us once, twice, shame on you, I'm out of here. So guys, we have to take actions, and it must happen now.
The house is on fire, man. We got to do something. Last word, Dr. Freeman.
Yes. So I believe that we need to have ministries that specifically target Black men. But I also think that as we develop initiatives, I won't call them ministry, but initiatives that come out of our church, that we be thinking about young Black men, all Black men, at the beginning of it, and how we can target some of the activities to address their needs, and also we need to have sovereignty, and this idea of having a theology that will properly put into context our role within not just the church, but within the denomination and even broader.
Good. This has been, just a phenomenal conversation. I've learned so much. Y'all, man, I'm ready to be like Malcolm X in the movie X and have Uncle Ronnie do like this, and we all, we don't gotta say that we all start marching. I'm gonna ask for some takeaways as we end this conversation. We talked about a lot, and we're talking about Black men in the Black church. You're talking about a lot. What are our takeaways? What do you, if you watch this conversation, what is one thing you want people to take away from this conversation? Uncle Ronnie, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to end with Dr. Freeman.
It's very simple. Our Black brothers in the village cannot be what they can't see. My wife's brother said it best. If you preach or if you teach, if you don't live what you teach or preach, it's just a speech and it won't reach. These brothers need to see Yahshua Messiah in the flesh, in the community, following the kingdom mandate of Luke 4:18. That's liberation.
Jaymie?
Yeah, I would say that in our Black church, we have to invest in our church, invest in our communities, invest in our males. We have to provide authentic support and feedback. And as Kirk Franklin said in one of his new songs, we have to showcase a strong God. And a strong God is a God who believes in justice. We have to also recognize the structural challenges that our males face in society and put bridges in place that could regain the confidence that they need. And by giving our males the tools and the skill sets that they need through our programming in our church, we will, in essence, lift the lids and the limits that have been holding them back from prosperity. And by doing that, we will automatically see growth in our church through the education and the manner in which we engage. So education and engagement through those means that I just made mention, I think are critical areas of spiraling or putting things in a path of growth.
And lastly, I'll just add, it's going to be important for us to find ways to decolonize our minds as we support our young men develop curriculum that will help them to see themselves as God would have them be seen.
That's good. This has been an awesome conversation. I thank you all for your wisdom, your knowledge, your expertise. Man, Defoe, this has been, I mean, Doc, this has just been phenomenal. I mean, the comment section was on fire. The stream, the conversation was on fire. Very necessary conversation. We see the need. We see the issues. We see that the house is on fire. It's time to get to work.
Yeah, this was a very inspiring, uplifting conversation for me. Listen, I'm ready to go to war whenever you all are ready to go to war. Be a disruptor whenever you all are ready. You just let me know. But listen, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for Uncle Ronnie, who's already had to leave, and for you all to come on. Dr. Freeman, you added a very important voice to this conversation. And listen, you all got to do it again. I keep saying we're going to stop this, but you all got to come on back next month, and we're going to have to do this all over again, because it was so powerful and it was so useful. And so I want to thank you all for that. Just really quick, I'm going to run through some things. Tomorrow we are having or relaunching our Sunday conversations. We have our ministerial director who will be coming on to talk about, with his wife, Barbara, who will be coming on to talk about relationships. And then next week at this same 4 o'clock hour, we're going to be having our mental health discussion we have a therapist, we have a clinical psychologist, we have a psychiatric nurse, and then we also have a marriage and family specialist. And so we'll be holding that forum on mental and emotional health on next Saturday at 4 o'clock. As a matter of fact, at 4 o'clock, all of these weeks, we have something going on. And so you can come on to the Relationship Ministries Facebook page, YouTube channel, and engage in something. But we'll have the gentleman back if you all just nod your head and consent to coming on back, and we'll continue this conversation. Why don't we just set up part 4, part 5, and then if you haven't seen any of these, I think this is part 4, isn't it? I don't know, who knows. Anyway, if you haven't seen any of the previous episodes, go on the conference website, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, on Facebook, and you can get the previous conversations that these gentlemen have had. Listen, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. And then, Corey, if you don't mind, Pastor Johnson, if you would just pray us out, pray for the men who are watching, pray for the women also that are watching, and then we'll bid you all a good night.
Our Father and our God, we just thank you so much for this day. We thank you for this time together. We thank you for this Sabbath, a time of rest and refreshing. Father, we've had an awesome conversation, one that was important, one that touched both our head and our hearts. We pray for every brother that is watching who has felt far from you. He's dealing with church hurt or church rejection. We pray, God, that your spirit would touch him, and that he would have an encounter, not with church, but with you. We pray for every woman who is watching. We pray for their strength and their protection. We pray, dear God, that you would give us the courage to work together to liberate our people. Work together to create healthy families and healthy communities and healthy church bodies and healthy cities. Father, I thank you for the conversation that we had, and I thank you for what you are going to do in the future going forward. I thank you for what will grow out of what has been planted today. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.